savings because you're not paying for setup and all of those kind of things every time. But I do think that we could say, let's look at our budget of $20 million and say, what's the period of time that we want to try to accomplish this? And come back and say, if I do it, let's say in year one, I need $2 million. In year two, I need $1 million. In year three, I need $3 million. In year four, I need $5 million. Okay, we could level load that and say, instead of having this fee go this way every month or every year, and somebody going, 1 year it's this, 1 year it's that, we come back and say, if we had $2 million a year over the next 10 years, we could do all the projects we want to do, and we can level load it that way. Like, there's ways to go at this that I think we can be a little bit more specific and get to your annual consideration as well as doing that. Knowing, look, could something go south that we don't know? That happens all the time in what we do. I had a bridge that we thought we were going to get 4 years out of. We had aqua leak that actually wiped out part of the bridge. We lost 4 years in time. We had to make a decision. We had to do that immediately, fix that bridge. We fixed it so that we could have time before we had to actually replace it. But we fixed it enough to buy ourselves at least 2 years. So, you know, there's ways for us to get around some of these things. I hear what you're saying about this concept of selling it this way. And I think that you're right. We're going to have to do that. But we can also, we can do the homework on our end with the engineer and saying, if we plan these projects, here's how we.
To that point, and not to push the monkey over to the engineer, but if they could give us an idea, looking at the projects, and maybe prioritize what is immediate, what is near term, what is 5 years out, then we could then math that and say, based on this, without holding any, because something will fail tomorrow morning that was in the 5 year out, we'd have a basis to say that translates. You know what, we have a high degree of confidence that $1.5 million a year for the next 5 years is going to get us 60–70% of the way there.
And knowing that it may not, you know, knowing that something could go wrong and could change it, and then we have to manage to that. I mean, that's what I do every day. I mean, that's part of the joy of my job, is that we plan this.
Every day is a surprise.
And then things go a different way, and that's okay. And we make choices. You know, we have money that's set aside for certain things, and then all of a sudden we decide this now becomes more important because it's the biggest issue that's in front of us.
Right.
And, you know, so I think what I'm just trying to say is I think as we get closer, one of the things that we need to do is more nail that down. And it may even require the board saying, here's our 5 top priorities. These are the ones, because they may make a decision. You know, I'm going to say this and we're going to have a flood next week, but we've had a very quiet 6 months. And when we have a very quiet 6 months or so, people get a little lax. You know, we had 2 years in a row that we experienced flooding multiple times throughout the year. I think last year was probably one of the first years I've been here that our flooding was very minimal. I mean, I don't even remember us having to close Goshen Road at the covered bridge. And I mean, that was like every year we had to do that. And, you know, sometimes twice a year. And so, you know, those kind of things, if you have a quiet year, then that kind of, everybody gets quiet on it. But that's why we have to keep doing our homework, get it in place, because we're going to have years like we had before. That's not a question. It's just now, how do we get the plan together? And my comment would be, yes, we know there's $20 million worth of projects today. That's actually the first 5 projects. It's actually bigger than that. So what's the number as close as we can get to it, understanding that there's going to be inflation the longer that we wait to do every project. And we just have to build that in and say, and my guess is that we don't start, if we say we need $3 million a year to make this work, like, let's say that's really the number. I doubt that we're going to increase
Yeah, from
times
zero.
3.
Right.
My
Yeah.
guess is that we're gonna build up, even if it's 1 million, my
Yeah.
guess is we're gonna build up over time.
Yeah,
And we're going to just have to do that.
Yeah.
And it may be that we decide that this is a perfect example of where we go out and we do a borrowing and we set our payment in such a way. I don't want to do it today when the interest rates are high, but
Mhm.
or higher, they're still pretty low in comparison in history, but where do we got really spoiled, when
Yeah.
we had 2 of our bond issues that were less than 2%. It's really hard for me to think about having 5% interest rates,
Right.
But my point being is, there is a reason, like there are sometimes you do borrow, and this may be one of those where we say the infrastructure is such that when we put it in the ground, it's 50-year life is easy, what it can be. So we ought to be going out and spreading that out over time, do a 30-year bond and go out and do projects.
Yes, the engineers, I think the key to this, again,
And then it becomes a debt service side. But go ahead.
correct, because if the engineers come back and say, you know what, they're 90% certain that we're gonna spend $20 million over the next 5 years, that may drive the board to, we need to think about financing this. And then we'll use tax as a basis to pay for this over time. Versus the engineers may say, now we're 10 years out. This is going to be over 10 years. And they may say, maybe we'll manage this through tax increase. So I don't know whether or not the engineers would be comfortable putting kind of
I
an
think it's
idea on that.
I think it's going to take both the engineer and the board, because this is what you have to remember is at the end of the day, the board is the one that makes the decisions whether we move forward with the project or not.
Yeah.
The engineer can give me the numbers all day long.
Yeah, but then they don't have
But
the authority.
They don't have the authority to do that. And the board has to come back and say, yes, this neighborhood is a priority, that neighborhood's a priority, but this project and this project and this project can wait. That's hard decision making that needs
Yes.
to be done. And I can understand why the board's a little hesitant to want to just try to do that. But I think that's what's going to have to happen in order for us to come up with a finance plan
Yeah.
that is holistic for the whole project.
Right.
But what I can tell you is one project alone is almost $6 million. So if we're going to do that, I don't know almost how we do it without doing a
Without doing
borrow.
financing, right?
Because I doubt that we're going to raise $6 million in 2 years.
In what year, in that short time frame.
As a board member, I understand this chart now that we've discussed it. I think if this chart showed up in somebody's mailbox.
It would be hard to explain.
Taxpayer, I would immediately read this and go, all right, I've got 6 acres, I'm on the hook for $180 and our stormwater problems are solved.
Yeah.
Okay, honey, let's write the check and we're done.
Yeah.
We're out of here.
And then I turn around and tell you, oh, by the way, you got to do that next year and the year after for the next 20 years.
And there's also a line on there that says it's for illustrative purposes, so it might be 185, it might be 82, but there's a one-time payment coming to solve this.
Yeah, but it doesn't say, but how I would handle that, what I would anticipate, we talked about communication. Before any final decisions are made, what I anticipate would really need to happen is through communication. That every parcel owner that's taxable gets a letter. They don't get a surprise bill in the mail.
Right.
They get a letter that gives them the heads up that says, we got $20 million to pay that has to be paid for. We're looking at paying for this over the next 5 years. You may want to come to this town meeting to hear the options that we're exploring. You can't just cannot send them a bill in the mail.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Oh, so
No,
this-
and I was,
This slide is just then.
this is
then I
for us.
misunderstood this slide.
This is for us. What we were looking for is directionally, this is the input exactly what we were looking for. Because you can see,
Yeah, this is not a final draft.
oh no, this is like baby first step.
Right.
This was, and now we know a big headache is off, well, the best options are off the table besides that. It'll kind of help us evolve. The communication piece is the key to this. And then once that communication piece happens, and it happens multiple times, the board then can kind of get that feedback and say, okay, it seems pretty clear to us that trying to raise $2.5 million through tax increase is a bad option. Let's look at financing.
You know, for several months, we've talked about a presentation for the board with slide deck. Is this one of the slides in the slide deck?
Not even,
No.
we're not even at that point. We're
We took a
not even
step
at
way
point.
back.
What's the status of the presentation or the slide deck?
Well, now the presentation, based upon what Steve is saying, is it's gonna become fairly simple.
Well, we were talking about the background and why we needed this and how many projects.
That's why what we have now is in the newsletter that's gonna go out is a full story. It's like 3 pages on stormwater and the history of this. We also have the engineer's report. What we need to get in the township website,
Is that report totally done?
it's
No,
a
so
dynamic.
it's just so we're where we are. We knew, and this report was done a year and a half ago, so we probably have to update it. But a year and a half ago, we knew we had roughly 32 projects in town that needed to be addressed. Stormwater
Yeah.
project. The top 5, we had the engineer go back out and do an evaluation of what they thought that project would take. And we came up with about $20 million worth of projects out of the top 5. Yeah. And I
The
will,
most-
and I want to preface
most
that by
significant.
saying those top 5 were in whole community, like all of the heights, if you're familiar with the place right behind us, or always get it backwards, but I think it's Upper St. Albans, where that's that your area where you used to live. So the Horton and Tyson area, the Florida Park area, the Avenues area, those areas were all built prior to the current stormwater regulations. So they are woefully inadequate in stormwater, handling stormwater in those neighborhoods.
And they're very old.
And they're very old. And so, but they're also very condensed. And so you have much smaller lots. I mean, some of the areas are just as old, like, I think Dunmanning, for example, where Alex is, that area is probably just as old in some ways as like the Avenues or, or at least the Heights. But you're looking at mostly 2-3 acre lots. And so it's, your impact is a lot less and you feel it a lot differently, although there's a stream right there. So the impact, as Alex knows, it's impacted greatly when there's heavy rains. About a third of your backyard goes away because of the water or whatever it is, but there's a big impact that it comes out. And so we have those kind of problems that we say are big issues, but they're not immediately impacting somebody's home in most cases. They're impacting land, but they're not impacting homes. In Horton and the Upper St. Albans, in the Heights, in Florida Park and in the Avenues, some people are having water in their basements. And so that's impacting the structure of their home. So we put those as the highest priority. They need to have the first piece. There also happen to be the biggest projects because you have to dig up roadways. You have to, you put a pipe in for sewer and you can get 8 inches and you can handle almost everything in the neighborhood. You do a stormwater, you might need a pipe that I can walk through, depending on how big the stormwater issue is. And so much different on how much you have to excavate, what the size of the hole is, all of those kind of things, and how far deep you have to go and all those kind of things. Because you don't pump stormwater. It has to be gravity the way you deal with it, right? So all that being said, we have this list. We know some of the projects are probably a couple $100,000. Other projects are 6 million. So it's not like there's a list of 32 that are all $6 million. There's a list of 32, but we purposely picked the big ones because they impacted homes first. That was our first priority.
To Alex's point though, Steve, I'm thinking next step.
I think next step is this. I think that we changed engineers. So I tried to give our new engineer time to get their feet wet. pun not intended, but anyway.
He couldn't help himself.
But but we tried to get we've tried to get the engineer up to speed, give him a little bit of time to get his, get going and understand what's going on in the township. I'm now ready to sit down and really have those tough conversations and start saying, now we have these projects. First of all, do those numbers still ring true a year and a half later? Everything,
Their assessment, right?
everything has gone up. Is that still the best solution? As a new engineer, they may have another solution. And so we need to do that. And then I need to go back to the board and say, board, here on these top 5 issues, here's the expenses. Do we still want to tackle these? And what is the order that you want to tackle them? And, I don't know that answer yet. And so, is this something that we do in $5 million segments over a 5-year period? And, we do some loans and we do that, or do we go out and borrow $20 million and go out and do all of them at one time? I just don't know those answers until we really get into it.
Yeah, because some of those, if you did over 5 years, it might be 30 million, but versus going out and doing them all at once, now you got 20 million. That's a
And then
$10 million savings right there. So,
Yeah, and then it's worth the cost of
worth the
borrowing
yeah,
to
absolutely.
go ahead and do it. We would also have to look at, based on where our debt is right now, how much I can borrow. I don't know that I could actually go out and borrow 20 million. We're limited. We can only have. I always get it wrong because I always forget whether it's a borough or a township. I know we're a township, but I always forget which one's which. But I think we can only have 2.5 times our
Revenue.
revenue. Does that sound right,
Yeah.
Lisa? Is it
That sounds
2.5 times?
Yeah.
Well, that's, I think what we would do is sort of model, hey, if you did it all at once, what's the cost? If you
Yeah,
did
that'd
it
be a good
over
idea.
time,
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's exactly where I see you all weighing in. I actually think you need some direction
Yeah.
from the engineer and from the board to come back and say, here's what we want to do. Now come up with plans of how we pay for this.
Right, we have done a lot of background research and data gathering. So we have some of these, like Steve mentioning the borrowing and how much we have available. We've done all that and we tried to put it all into a slide presentation. It turned out it was just too much information at once.
And
that's what-
it gets very complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to do it in slices. You got to make it simple at the top. But you
were-
can't
were
skip the
doing this in
details.
Public.
Well, no, now we're.
We're trying to do it
No.
amongst ourselves, never mind in
Yeah.
public.
Yeah,
So-
we were trying
so
to do it
just
as a
so-
subcommittee.
Just Scott, I want to make sure you're aware, this is a public meeting that we're having
Yes.
right now. But you don't see public here, but it's being recorded.
Right.
And so it's a public meeting. Anybody can listen in and do that. So, so when the board meets, anytime there's more than 2 of you, it has to be public. Okay, so.
So it's two is okay, but more than 2,
Correct.
you have to do notice.
Immediate, like, that's why we set that group up, that it was just you and Lisa
Yeah.
working on that. Because, and then you report back to this group before
Yes.
we go any
Okay.
further. Because if there were 3 of you doing it, it would have to be an advertised public meeting.
Got it.
And so I just
Yeah,
wanted
that's
to be
good.
clear
No, I appreciate that.
that on that.
So I just read the opinion of the court on that.
Oh, you looked it
on that
up?
Westchester's. I very briefly looked at it.
Westchester.
Yeah, it was Westchester. They tried to impose a fee on a university. And the court struck it down. But what's interesting there is it's because the borough had said, well, we're doing this stormwater management. You're doing the stormwater management thing to benefit everyone, the public as a whole. And that
Oh, you
was-
try to put the cost on the
and
university
that's
as
the
compared to
downfall right there, as opposed to on a
everybody.
project by project basis and saying, wait a minute, this stormwater issue over here is really the problem of this neighborhood. Not the problem of the university and so forth. Like the township hadn't broken it up that way into different projects. There's a lot more to it than that, but that was my quick read, but which suddenly gets me thinking.
Right.
Once you have this engineer's report come, we have the engineer's report, here's the main projects we want to do. Let's say one of the projects is some neighborhood over here. Pick one.
Yeah.
I live over on Dunman. I don't want to pay for their stormwater. Right? You're gonna have a lot of residents saying.
Oh, it's gonna open Pandora's box.
It's a different situation. If the flooding is at the intersection of 252 and Route 3 here. Okay, y'all use that. I'm not using that neighborhood over there. So, if we get the engineer's report, and it's localized, do we then start down the
Wow.
path of saying, hey, let's let the neighborhoods pay?
Well, that was one of the discussions we actually had. And you know, that is a good question, you know,
Special
because the
Talked about
newer neighborhoods have already paid
Versus
as
listening.
part of, you know, a listener has put in millions and millions of dollars worth of stormwater into their project. Where the community just to the west of them, Echo Valley, has had very little money put in. The question becomes, and always is when we fix stormwater, do we do it for the good of the whole community? Just like when we fix roads, the question is, like, if I fix roads on Dunminning, does anybody else get the benefit? Then the residents on Dunminning, because there's a perfect road that ends in a cul-de-sac. And most likely, nobody else drives down that road, but Dunminning residents and the deliveries that you get, you know, Amazon and all of those, right?
It's a public road.
And
Yes.
so the question becomes, do we start doing that in that? And we've not done that in the past. We've always said, when we fix something, we better the whole community for everybody. And that's been our position. But it has been discussed, particularly in the Heights and in the avenues and in Florida Park, that these are neighborhoods that were, when the development was done, in some of these cases, these neighborhoods, you know, Florida Park goes back,
Yeah.
you know, what?
100 years.
It's more than 100 years, isn't it? I mean, like, I think it's almost close to 200 years in that it was a vacationing spot
The railroad.
for people to come out and vacation, and they didn't have any of those thoughts at the time, right? They, you know, and when you even look at the situation, when you look at your lot's a 2-acre lot or 3-acre lot, whatever it is, and that was the subdivision, how it was done. These communities that we're talking about, most homes are sitting on 2 or 3 lots because they were all, you know, 10 or 20 feet wide lots, so many feet deep, and that's how that you bought 5 of them to build your home, and it became your lot. And you have 5 lots, you get 5 tax bills, you know, over those 5 lots. I mean, it's, you know, it's a totally different kind of thing than in some other neighborhoods. And so the question becomes, are we bettering the whole community, or are we just bettering that development? And we have talked about that. Like, if we're going to go in, and in some neighborhoods need curbing, and we had never put in curbing. So do we go back and put in curbing? And if we do, who pays for that? Well, we would say that's literally just the benefit of that particular neighborhood. The rest, nobody else benefits if there's curb or not curb. But stormwater, if there's not flooding happening, sometimes the flooding happens in that community, but it goes down. Like, if we don't fix the problems that happen in the Heights, it impacts the township. The water that came off the Heights, that one storm, actually lifted our field, the artificial turf field, and caused it to buckle. And so we had that much water flow through and come down from that direction. So fixing the Heights, you might argue, benefits others because it doesn't impact downstream folks that way. So yeah, there's an interesting piece you have to think about in the whole process, but I hear what you're saying.
That's
We
why
have
you have a
talked about it.
township. I mean, it's like a township. That's everybody in the township. You
Correct.
can't start saying this street or that street, or, you know.
I think it
I'm
depends on what
also-
you're doing. I think there
I
are
really-
times that you would say that it is. Go ahead.
And I know we've got to end pretty quickly. It almost sounds to me like, based upon is fee totally off the table? Or, given what the courts are saying, is a fee still an option, but it needs to be of this parameter?
I think that we would say that there's more, that there needs to be more research into the whole thing, because I asked the question, what happens if we set up an authority? Authorities don't have the right to tax. They only have the right to
Right.
charge a fee.
Right,
and they have to charge it equally over all people that are getting the benefit.
like sewer.
So that,
There's a
there's,
workaround.
well, but there's definitely, I just wanted you to be aware, it's not as simple as it was 2 months ago when we were having this conversation. That's the
Yeah.
key. That's the reason why I shared it. We don't have all the answers yet. I'm sure that it most likely will be appealed. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of things that may still go on.
Well, the solicitor should be able to give you a good beat on what.
That's why we wait for the solicitor to kind of do it. He and I just haven't had a chance to sit down and have the full conversation. He just kind of gave me a
Give the
heads up
Yeah,
and said, you need to be aware
okay,
that this may throw a wrinkle into the plan. Since you've been talking about this, I was not necessarily going to bring it up today, but when we started talking about it, I thought, well, I need to say it could be an issue and we need to think through it.
And I raised my point because of this comment by this court that just stating that it's for the general good sort of was their undoing.
Yes,
yeah.
And then my brain starts thinking, wait, a minute. I mean, the example you gave with the Heights, if the runoff from that neighborhood is causing a field to live, well, that's the Heights problem, not my problem. In other words, I get it, but fixing the problem helps me if I want to use the field, but the problem is being caused by a very specific set of homes.
Sure.
That probably should get together and figure out how they're going to address that problem themselves.
well, but we have the ability, just so that I'm clear, we have the ability, I mean, infrastructure like stormwater is typically considered a governmental function, right? And we have the ability to go into a neighborhood and do improvements in that neighborhood and actually charge back to that neighborhood for the improvements.
Special assessment.
So it's a special assessment for those folks. So yes, the neighborhoods might need to get together, but it could be we as a community could make the call and say, we think that this is essential for the benefit of the whole community. And we're going to charge, and we can do a combination. We could say, we're going to charge you X for this amount, but because there's more involved and there are benefits to others, we're going to make part of it a tax benefit and part of it a local community special assessment.
If you take this neighborhood or Florida Park, I mean, I don't think those people, those homes and those people are able to handle that whole process.
Right. Right.
It's not like they're living over by Aronimink or living in Lister.
I mean, it is a question, you know, I mean, and we just put in $33 million worth of sewer. That it's going to impact Florida Park. And so each one of those individual residents is going to be spending somewhere between 15 and 25,000, maybe 30,000 to hook up. Plus turn around and have a fee that they're paying into public sewer. So, you know, do I turn around and do their stormwater right behind that and say, oh, by the way, here's another $30,000 bill, you know, that's going to be done over 4 years worth of taxes or whatever, you know. So there's a lot of questions we have to ask, and we have to look at what makes sense. And, you know, it may be that we say we can't fix that today because it doesn't make sense to do it, but we can do this. You know, we didn't get here in 2 years. We are not going to solve this in 2 years. This is a 20-year fix. I honestly believe that it's going to take that long before we get our hands totally around it. I mean, I think we'll get our hands around it. I shouldn't say that, but before we actually get everybody taken care of, I don't think we can do it overnight. I just don't. And
I don't think so.
I mean, if you think back to how long it took us just to get sewers to all those places, you know, I think we could be talking similar kind of time frame to do everything else.
All right, so in terms of what Lisa and I are doing, we're gonna stand down, Steve, and wait for you to come back around with. We
I
now
think-
have information that we can then say, okay, this is directionally, without making any firm commitments, this is kind of some parameters that we can then start to do some modeling.
Yeah, and I think that even potentially we should have one sit down between now and then just to go through and say, what is it specifically? What are all the specifics that you'd like to have in order before you take the
Yes,
next
okay,
step?
yeah, we have our background facts sheet that we want to finish, okay.
What are all the other information? What's all the other
The open
information
information, right,
that you think you need so that we have marching orders that are very clear?
okay,
that we,
All right, so
that,
we can do that. You let us know. Okay, public comment. Anybody out there? Crickets? I see crickets. I hear crickets. Items for next agenda. I think we had identified goals. I'm not sure if there's anything else that we identified. The next meeting. Any other comments from the board here? If not, we are adjourned.